I wish nothing on anybody other than to have the experience of having their full self be welcome anywhere. That's part of the invitation and like the offering. It's like, let's do this together.
And yeah, how do we get more in connection with each other? How do we get more, like Julio was saying, find your tribe, find your people. And if it's not there, then create it and they'll find you. And that's just what we're needing now more than ever.
Welcome to Psychedelic Source, where wisdom meets practice in the evolving landscape of psychedelic medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Sandra Dreisbach, and I'm here to help you navigate the complex intersection of ethics, business, and personal growth in the psychedelic space. Whether you're a practitioner, therapist, entrepreneur, or simply curious about this transformative field, you've found your source for authentic dialogue, practical resources, and community connection. In each episode, we'll dive deep into the stories, strategies, and ethical considerations that matter most to our growing ecosystem. Let's tap in to our inner source of wisdom and explore what it means to build a sustainable and ethical psychedelic future together.
The information shared on this podcast, our website, and other platforms may be triggering for some viewers and readers and is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional medical, legal, or therapeutic advice. While we explore topics related to altered states of consciousness, we do not endorse or encourage illegal activities or substance use. Always research your local laws and consult qualified professionals for guidance. The content provided is, as is, and we are not liable for any actions taken based on the information shared. Stay supported and informed, act responsibly, and enjoy the podcast.
In today's episode, I have the opportunity to talk with two people in community who work together and support not only psychedelic-assisted therapy, but also work with each other to help support psychedelic recovery. They each have their own psychedelic recovery journeys. They are both licensed medical family therapists. They both also are teaching at Lewis and Clark College to help educate future therapists who are going to be working with psychedelic therapy, and also have a real heart space and commitment to this work. When you hear from each of them, I'm sure you'll see why I'm really excited for their contributions to this space and their unique perspectives on psychedelics and recovery and what that can look like, given from their own personal experience and how they show up in relationship with each other in their work as they support people in community as a community. Elizabeth Hoke, she actually has been working for quite some time, who's experienced not just her own challenges around undiagnosed ADHD as a child that led for her to early substance abuse. She is also passionate and dedicated to helping people who struggle with ADHD and addiction. And she uses a mix of theoretical tools, which you'll hear a little bit more about here. She is a certified ADHD clinical service provider and has spent more than a decade serving and supporting clients who struggle from obstacles of living in a world that doesn't always support people who have ADHD. She also has spent a decade as clinical director of the Liberation Institute, which she supervises interns and trainees so that they can collectively provide therapy for individuals, groups, and families on an affordable sliding scale. Julio Iniguez, he also has had multiple positions in the mental health and dealing with addictions or substance dependency field, including direct service counseling and practice and agency, program development and management, as well as clinical supervision of direct counseling staff. And he brings a real beautiful perspective in terms of a systemic, culturally responsive, and trauma-informed perspective to his work with individuals and couples in his private practice. An additional note for this particular episode I'd like to bring forward is that this does deal with issues around addiction, substance abuse, and recovery. So keep that in mind as you approach this episode and aware of how this may bring up issues for yourself. And if you find yourself in a situation where you are struggling with addiction or substance dependency, I encourage you to reach out to some of the resources mentioned in this episode and to get help. and to be open to all sorts of possibilities for recovery. Last I heard, there was at least 9 times that people make attempts before they have find that they're more on the recovery side of the recovery journey. So please, I just want to encourage you to take care of you as always, and to reach out to Source yourself in all of your journeys and recoveries, and reach out for the help that you need. Well, welcome to the show, both you, Liz and Julio. It's such a pleasure and delight to have you both here. And my audience may be curious, like, why are we having 2 people? But maybe I'll have you guys take the lead and talk about, what do you guys do together in the psychedelic space?
Sounds good. Liz, do you want to start?
Sure. So I am a therapist here in Portland, Oregon, and one of my specialties is in addiction recovery. And a few years ago, Julio and I were asked to teach a continuing education class on recovery, but also how psychedelics can be used in recovery, because that's another thing I'm really interested in. So we did a bunch of research, and we just got really excited about this idea of how are psychedelics being used in addiction recovery, and how can that be supported in a communal way. So we created a group called Recovery's Remedy out of those meetings, where it's a little bit different than typical recovery groups, but it has its own way of being. It's its own thing. So I'll let Julio tell a little bit more about.
Yeah, no, and I love that we're going to talk about recovery today, and to hear about your guys' program and the innovation. I mean, I cannot tell you how many people I've talked to who either currently are struggling with dependency of multiple sorts, but also who seek out psychedelics and plant medicines as a way to recover, and yet find this sort of like disjoint between what's offered in AA programs, even though there's now psychedelics in recovery, although we're not going to be talking about that. But I'll be curious to hear, Julio, a little bit more from your perspective too.
Yeah. So I think, when I first met Liz, it was actually, we were coming together as faculty for what was going to be one of Oregon's psilocybin training programs. And so that's when we met. And so it was a bunch of other folks that were mental health professionals. But when we went around talking about our why, like, why are we interested in doing that? Liz and I shared that part of our story of being people in, recovery. And so that started conversations between the both of us around being in a space where we're using psychedelics for healing, but we're also, um, dealing with a history of substance abuse, right? And so it's like, how do you reconcile the two? And so I think that sparked the interest in not only creating training so that there's more of that being presented at an educational level where people are learning how to work with both of those and that they're not mutually exclusive, but that there's also some really important things to pay attention to when you're working with somebody who has a history of addiction, when you're doing psychedelic healing. But then also just this shared like appreciation for the connection of like, I'm so glad that I can talk about both of these things with you. Like, this is a breath of fresh air. And I think that's what led to later on being like, what if we just created a community offering where we actually don't have to be therapists, where we can bring our full selves, and when we can talk about recovery, and where we can talk about, psychedelic integration in a way that like is just open, compassionate, non-pathologizing, shame-free. And that's how Recovery's Remedy was born.
I love that. I love that heart and that beginning. And I obviously can't go too far into this without asking each of you if you'd be open to share a little bit of your own personal journey with either psychedelics or your recovery journey, since it sounds like they've gone hand in hand to some extent. Maybe Liz, you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So, as far back as I can remember, I always felt like an alien. Like, I just really never felt like I fit in as a kid. I just remember I'd always have to mimic what everyone else was doing around me just to feel like I was getting it right. And you know, around the age of 12, a friend of mine, we were home alone and she was like, "Hey, you want to drink this thing?" And we did. It was a beer, it was a Corona. And the relief that it brought was immediate. Like I finally stopped questioning who I was and what I just was in the moment. And I felt so good about myself after that. So fast forward, like anytime I could get my hands on anything, I would, by 16, I had moved out of my mom's house and I was, finding ways to work in bars and really just be around alcohol as much as possible. And then, with having a developing brain being something that was, drowning in alcohol all the time, it really didn't help me make good decisions in my life. So I made a lot of bad decisions. And, by the age of 20, I was bartending and just, drinking all the time. Like I couldn't really get through school. I was having a really hard time. I also had undiagnosed ADHD, which really contributed to a lot of the way I felt about myself and a lot of the way I was already failing in school because things just the way that my brain was working school was really hard for me. So when, putting alcohol on top of all that, it really wasn't helping. So, when I was around 24, I had a good friend named Clint take me to a taqueria and he cried and he was like, "Listen, you're killing yourself and I can't watch it." And no one had ever said that to me. Like, I think because I'm pretty good at making it seem like I'm doing all right and I never would ever ask anyone for help. I'm like, "No, I got it covered." I just never asked for help. He was like, "This is ridiculous and I don't want to be around you if you're going to act like this. I love you and I can't watch you do this." And so that was the beginning of my recovery path. I did end up getting sober through AA, but what was hard for me was that I'm not a I'm not a religious person, and I didn't know what spirit was. I thought spirit and religion were the same things. So I'd go to these meetings in churches and they'd be like, "What's your higher power?" And I didn't have a higher power. I was raised culturally Jewish. That's where the lineage comes from, is Ashkenazi Jews, but we're not actually religious by, practice. And so I didn't know what a spiritual practice was. But then I ended up, relapsing and starting to drink again just because I had gotten a few years of sobriety, but I wasn't feeling better. I went from being an alcoholic to then I was like smoking and then I was like acting out in different kind of compulsive behavioral ways that, having bad relationships or bad friends, things that I was just my addiction was morphing into different behaviors and doing different things. So I didn't feel in recovery. I felt I was sober, but I wasn't in recovery.
But still living a toxic lifestyle, basically.
Yes.
That
Yeah,
wasn't
but I was
actually healthy
sober. So I
for
was
you.
like,
Yeah, you're like, I got the sober coin,
I got
but
this, I'm chain smoking and drinking coffee, and I'm like, I am going to these meetings, which are helpful, but at the
Yeah.
same time, I was not engaging in finding what my spiritual practice was. So I relapsed, but in my relapse, I ended up, someone gave me some psilocybin, and during this specific experience, I remember I was like out and I was looking at nature and there was like these really beautiful trees and it was raining and everything just seemed so beautiful. And I had so much gratitude for like the whales in the ocean and the birds in the trees. And I had so much gratitude for nature. And I felt so, so much in that moment. And then I realized like, wow, this body I've been given, this is also nature. Like I am nature. I am not separate from it. Like I am the birds and the trees and the whales. Like we are all on this tiny rock floating in space and we are all connected to each other. And I don't want to hurt this anymore. I don't want to hurt myself anymore. And that was the first time I realized that I was really hurting myself. It was like this epiphany of like, wow, you've really been destroying yourself. Like even when you took the alcohol and the drugs out, I was still
Still
destroying
in
myself.
that pattern. And I love that part of your story where like it wasn't that you weren't, quote unquote doing the work as it were and showing up for your recovery. It's that it didn't fully complete the picture for you and there's some more work to be done, and that the introduction of psilocybin for you at least seemed to make a shift in the mindset. And this is just me saying you don't have to identify with any of this.
Yeah. 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 No, definitely. That's all of a sudden what spirit was to me. I was
Yeah.
like, "Oh, wait, this doesn't have to be a religious thing. I can just be in relationship with nature in this very spiritual way that I had never known was a possibility before." I thought religion was the only pathway to spirit. And I was like, "Oh, I can just go outside and sit on with this tree and feel the presence of the tree and find my spirit that way." And the mushrooms really helped guide me to that place. So that was huge. It was profound. But I did end up, because I was still surrounding myself with all the things that were encouraging the behavior and the addictive things I was doing, I ended up drinking again. And then 2 years after that, I went back to AA and they were like, well, you can't, I was like, I'd like to integrate, psychedelics in my practice. And they're like, no, you can't. Like once you're an addict, you're always an addict. Anytime you do anything like that, you'll have to restart your sobriety date and you're not sober if you're doing that. And I found all this judgment from that. And so I ended up going to AA, which was helpful again and getting sober. But then after a year or two, I was needing more. I was needing more from it, and I was glad and I'm grateful that the 12-step community is there. But I just needed something that was inviting other ways of finding a spiritual practice that didn't come, like Julio said, for this like shaming and judging and rigid rules that are telling you how to do it. And so so
Yeah, and
that's
a lot
where
of people even bring this up in relation to, I mean, we're not gonna go through the whole thing about 12-step, but, given some of the origin stories of the founders, right?
Mhm. Totally.
Having used, as LSD as part of his, experience, but that wasn't something that was publicly shared.
yeah.
Um and I'll put a pin in that because I want to get to hear a little bit of Julio's story here, who's been patiently waiting. Because I know the next step's going to be about what motivated you both to create this piece more. But Julio, if you're open to share a little bit of your story and your relationship and how that involved also psychedelics in the end.
Sure. Yeah. So, my story is very similar to Liz's. So my family migrated from Mexico to the United States when I was 6 years old, and I didn't speak a lick of English. So, very early on, there was experiences about like not being understood, or experiences about like not feeling connected, or experiences of like, not belonging that were part of my early development. And so when I grew up, developed into like a young adult, I found that sense of connection and belonging through like drinking with others. Like I mean, I was the coolest guy in the room because I could drink so much and because I could smoke so much. And so that's sort of like the way that I found that sort of was like an analog of like this need that just went unmet for a long time in a significant way. Um, and I was also just absolutely reckless. So one of the things that um, I think worked to my advantage is that like I got into recovery at age 25, which I think is relatively young. And part of that is going into 12-step meetings as a result of like I was court mandated to go through a whole drug and alcohol program, and I had to get my court card signed, that I went to meetings. And so I was actually going to meetings, and I would be at the meetings and I would hear these stories of people that like would lose so much because of their addiction. And I would not see myself in them because I'm like, I'm just getting started. It's just like, you know what I mean? Like, do I have to, this thing about belonging came up again, where it's just like, do I have to suffer more to come back here to be able to tell a story like these people are telling? And so I took what worked, which was like, I'm not drinking anymore. My life is no longer unmanageable. I developed the habit of not drinking. And then went on to, that's what it inspired me to become a marriage and family therapist. And then I moved to Portland. And then I was in Portland, in my, master's program. But similarly, relationships to money, relationships to food, relationships to other people were very painful, because what was driving those relationships felt a lot like what was driving my drinking, but I wasn't drinking anymore. Right. So I was in that place. And then I found this sort of like holistic yoga teacher that combines yoga and like 12-step recovery. And so that was like really resonating with me. And then towards the end of my master's program, one of the certificates I did in that time was like an international family therapy program. So we got to travel to Uganda, and I also spent 3 months in Colombia. And during the time that I was in Colombia, I was invited to sit at an ayahuasca ceremony. And so I had to do this like reckoning with myself where I was just like, wow, this is a drug. This is going to alter my consciousness. Like, do I say no to this because I'm in recovery? I'd been to Colombia before, and in a cultural exchange with Afro-Colombian women, they offered me this thing called biche, which is a type of alcohol, and I turned it down. And afterwards, I regretted it because I was like, they were just trying to connect with me across cultures in a way that like I ended up rejecting it. And I feel like I actually missed out. I don't know how much that would have actually, if I took a little sip, I don't know how much that would have actually impacted my going back to drinking, since my drinking career was very short and very quick. So having that as a point of reference, I decided to, you know what, I'm going to see what this is about. And I'm going to go into it with the intention of healing and of just being open and seeing what happens. And in some of those experiences, I experienced some of the most embodied feelings of like self-love and self-acceptance that I'd heard people talk about, but just, it's one of those things was like, oh, that's not for me. Like, yeah, I know that's possible for other people, but that's not for me. So I really experienced it there. And then I came back and was talking to my teacher, who's the yoga recovery guy. And I was telling him about this, and he's like, you know what, Julio, you and I have a few things very much in common, which was this really weird, nice way of saying like, I don't agree with what you're doing. Um, and at the same time, I also started addressing the fact that like my addiction was manifesting in all these other ways. And so I started working like a Buddhist recovery program, refuge recovery. And I got to go on retreat with that teacher. And we were doing the loving kindness meditation where we do phrases of may I be at ease, may I be loved. And so he was giving this Dharma talk about like, I had to practice this for 25 years before I really believed it. And like, you just have to be diligent and you just have to repeat the phrases. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there remembering this ayahuasca experience where I know what it feels like to love myself. And I know what it feels like to really embody that. And I felt guilty and I felt shame. I was like, oh my God, I cheated. Like, how can I get here so quick? Right. There's always this sense of doing something wrong. Right. So I actually went and, pulled him aside and was like, hey, I got to talk to you about something. Like, I had this experience, with ayahuasca. And now when I do the metta meditation, like, I don't feel like I have to wait 25 years. I feel like I have a reference point. Like, what do I do about that? And he said, appreciate it and be grateful for it. And so that was this like, oh, okay, maybe this is an actual path that can also be a part of my recovery that also includes using mind altering substances in a different way than I ever have before. The issue was at that time that there wasn't anywhere to go to talk about it. All right. So that sort of leads into where this came from, where Recovery's Remedy came from.
Yeah, and maybe you can talk, maybe now we can go back to both of you. Recovery is remedy. Now, why that name? What is different about what you all do? You've already kind of given us a bit of a teaser as to how it's different, but maybe you guys can say more. Like where clearly it's not just a name, it's not just a theory, it's not just a practice. It's part of what you both are living, right? Uh, and for those of you who probably won't know, we had a little chance to pre-talk before this, and I was just saying like, well, we need to have more examples of people who are actually living in a good, I don't even want to say recovered state. I want to say in sort of like working with ourselves in relationship with whatever arises. That's a normal human experience, right? So what can you say? What's your journey and what do you present as a community?
Yeah, so I think, instead of this idea that sobriety is the center of the program, it's more about relationship. We talk about what right relationship means. Like, are you in right relationship with yourself and your environment and the people around you? How are you treating your body? How are you treating everything around you? So instead of it just being like, okay, you're sober, you get to come here and talk about being sober, it's more about, are you actually working a recovery program? And I think when we talked about it being the name Recovery's Remedy, like, there's so many beautiful things about the work that's being done in 12 step and AA and the different recovery models. But the thing that is not that great is like, is the shame, is the rigid rules, is the judgment, is the like, you have to do it this way or you're not a part of this. And
Yeah.
so we
All
figured
or nothing sort of
it's all or
mindset.
nothing. And we were like, what? We need a remedy for that. We need a remedy for that. So could this be another way of doing it? And I think for us, when you look at this different stages of change, right? There's like pre-contemplation, contemplation, and like actual action and maintenance. There's all these different stages of change. And with the Recovery's Remedy, we allow anyone to come no matter what phase they're in. So sometimes people will come and say, I know I want to quit smoking weed, but I'm not. I haven't done that yet. And I'm going to just show up every time I meet and talk about like, more of a harm reduction approach of like, I did it a little less this week. If, what we do ask people is like, if you have a really strong addiction to something, like I can say for me, I'm a very, very sensitive person, and alcohol it just completely like takes me, it hijacks me. So I can't drink. There's other substances in my life that I can interact with that I could come to the meeting and be like, hey, maybe I drank too much coffee this week, or hey, maybe I interacted with a person in this way and I got really high off of them. And now I'm like trying to figure out how to bring myself back down. So the rule is, instead of it being sobriety, it's more of, okay, so if you have something in particular in your life that's really causing your addictive behavior to be out of your own, make you out of your relationship with yourself, then we're asking you to, abstain for that for the meetings. But if there's other things in your life and you're really working on your relationship to it and to other things, then let's bring that to the meeting. So there's a less rigid structure.
No, I love that because and that was actually leading me to part of I was going to do a follow-up question, and maybe, and Julio can chime in on this too. On You mentioned right relationship, and then you demonstrated, and you're teaching them in terms of, we don't have to call it healthy boundaries, but we could talk about having right relationship with the community, right? And this is what's important for us in relationship, and this is what it means for us to have these relationships with substances, and, and to show up in community, right? That literally demonstrating like, okay, everyone's having some things that they're working through relationship with. We're willing to take you as is, but understand that you need to do none of these particular things during a meeting so that we can actually provide the opportunity to have a right relationship with you and with each other. So I really love that. Julio, do you have any thoughts, like, I mean, about what is right relationship to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, part of how I want to answer that too is just sharing about like what we offer at Recovery's Remedy. Because I think one of the things that's really important is we talk about our personal experiences in 12 step meetings, where like for me, it was like not feeling like I had a sense of belonging. And then there's also this sense of like how sometimes in 12 step meetings, like addictions are siloed based on the substance or the behavior. So it's like you go to NA or you go to AA or you go to MA or you go to CODA, or right, like they're all different. And so part of what we're trying to do at Recovery's Remedy is like say from a place of understanding addiction from a concept of like animism, as of like addiction is this frequency, it's this energy, it's this thing that can show up in your life in a multiple different ways, right? It can show up with substances, with behaviors, with food, with money, with sex, right? It can show up all these different ways. And what we want to do is be in relationship with that energy and understand where it's showing up. Because the thing is like, I think as long as we are in a human body, we're going to be in relationship with coping through ways that have a short-term benefit, but a long-term, deficit. And so what we're trying to do is also create a space where we don't offer a program. Like most recovery meetings, whether it was like refuge recovery has like the Eightfold Path as the program. 12-step meetings have the 12 steps as the recovery program. And like those are undeniably transformative forms of wisdom and transformative structures that facilitate healing. And like we have absolutely zero against any of that. We're not in competition with that. Most of the people that come to Recovery's Remedy have benefited greatly from those programs. What isn't available at those programs is if I'm talking about my addiction, but I'm also bringing in and I'm using the substance, usually that's not welcome. And so what we want to do is have that be welcome. So part of the reason why we don't offer a program is because those are already out there. What we offer is like shame busting, right? So it's like you can really talk about anything. We're going to go into like the shadows of ourselves and talk about the things that we don't talk about anywhere else. We're going to do it in a way where we're honoring, like, the program is the collective wisdom. So the thing for me about using plant medicines to heal my addiction is that my addiction can also take over my use of plant medicines. And I think that's one of the things that people don't talk in the psychedelic space is like sometimes people behave in these ways and in ways that, like, from someone who's been through addiction looks kind of addictive, right? But it's like it's like one of these like unspoken things. And so for me, if I'm thinking about how I'm relating to that in my own head, I don't think I can really trust it because of my history. But when I say it out loud in a group of people where I can track how it's being received, or sometimes it's not even somebody telling me how I'm coming off. When I say it out loud, I hear myself in the ears of the collective and I'm like, oh my God, I am bullshitting myself right now. This is a terrible idea, right? Like I am not being honest with myself. And so that's what we offer is just like a place where through what gets generated when people come together, when we tap into that collective wisdom from a place of kindness, curiosity, compassion, the sense of like anything is welcome, the answers sort of reveal themselves. So we don't actually need a program. The program is the experience of being there for that 90 minutes together.
That's so beautiful. I love that. And I love everything from the shame busting concept, but really just giving that radical compassion and acceptance and honesty that's needed for the full experience. But I also love that you brought up something that I feel like people don't talk about enough in relationship with psychedelics and recovery, that some people seek out psychedelics thinking that it's going to be the end-all be-all solution for recovery. I can personally account for people I've been in relationship with who've, who've done, like, for instance, like you'll hear, like, I did ceremony after ceremony after ceremony after ceremony, sounding almost like an addiction, right? And like I'm still struggling with my alcohol, or it shifted to fentanyl, or it shifted to some other opiate, or deep into heroin and then back again, and then they're going back into ceremony again, and they're repeating the cycle, and it's included in their cycle. Do you have anything that could give us some wisdom around that, or some insight around those people who may be tuning in, who may be stuck in that kind of a cycle?
Yeah, definitely. It makes me think we're talking a lot about right relationship. And, I have to say that right relationship is, it's an indigenous term that we have learned about, right? And for me, I learned about that from reading Robin Wall Kimmer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. She has this really beautiful quote that says, "It's not the land which is broken, but our relationship to the land." That's the work of artists, storytellers, and parents. We braid sweetgrass to come into right relationship. And I just say that because this idea that you said, people are just taking medicine, right? They're like flying down to these countries and they're eating up all the mushrooms, or they're drinking the ayahuasca, and they're not in relationship with like the impact that they're having on the medicine or the communities that they're going to get these ceremonies. Like they're it's just this extractive thing. Like, I need more ceremony. I'm staying in extraction. So even if you're just here growing your own mushrooms, you're in an extractive relationship with the mushrooms. If you're like, why are you not working yet? What are you doing for me? Why isn't this happening fast enough? And so if we get back to that, like, oh, wait, how am I in relationship with this being, right? The mushrooms are a being. The ayahuasca, all these different medicines are beings. And if we don't know how to be in relationship with them, then we're not going to be able to actually get that healing that we're looking for. And that healing is like, what are we giving back to in that relationship?
Yeah. Julio, what are your thoughts?
I think part of what I'll share there is like, I know the phenomenon you're talking about, right? And sometimes like even firsthand, right, where it's like we can end up in relationship with psychedelics in a way where we're like that sense of the magic bullet. This is going to be the thing, right? And then it doesn't work. And
Yeah.
so
So
there's
just take
like
this one time, one journey, one experience, and you'll be cured. No,
sometimes
I
that's
guess if you
actually
hear
how
this,
it's
no.
portrayed, right?
Yeah, it is.
I think sometimes that's actually how it's portrayed, and I think that is to the detriment of people that have issues with substance abuse, and particularly because there is a culture of like consumerism and consuming more, and like we have to like come to terms with that, and also um, that people find places to go where they can talk about what's happening, which is like I'm engaging with the medicine, and I'm still this addiction is still manifesting in this really harmful way, right? Because like one of the tools that I use with clients is it's called the 3 circles. And it's a way to manage essentially what right relationship looks like for that particular person. It's a living document. It's very individualized. Um, it comes from the work of like Patrick Carnes and like sexual addiction, but it's like the type of addictions where abstinence is not the solution, like food. People that have addiction to food, they can't just be abstinent from food. They still have to eat.
You
If
need to
people
live.
have, right, exactly. Or with money or with sex, right? There's like these everyday behaviors that can become addictive and create destruction. And so what we need to figure out in terms of what makes a healthy relationship is our boundaries between us and another person, between us and ourselves, between us and the behavior, between us and a substance. And what's helpful in setting boundaries is being really clear about what the boundary actually is. And so the way that the 3 circles works is the inner circle is very explicitly and clearly stated the behavior that we don't want to participate anymore. And so for someone who has like a recovery meeting background, that's like if you participate in that behavior, that's what would change your date. That's when you take the newcomer's chip, right? And so it could look whatever it can look like, different for everybody. And then the middle circle is all the behaviors that don't change your date, but if you spend enough time there, you'll end up in the other place. So if you're not sleeping enough, if you're not getting good enough sleep, if you're fighting with like your partner, if you're not spending your money correctly, like there's all these kinds of things that are like high risk.
That'll put you at risk. Yeah, that increase your risk. Right.
Right. And then the best part of it is the outer circle. And so the outer circle are all the things that help you cultivate a recovery lifestyle. So is it meetings? It could be meetings for some people. Is it a 12-step meeting? Is it a refuge recovery meeting? Is it a celebrate recovery meeting? Is it going to work out? Is it going out into nature? It's basically where it's the biggest circle because this is the most expansive one, but this is where you build your recovery lifestyle. What are the things that I need to do and like behaviorally so that I don't need to go into the inner circle? How do I support myself from staying out of there and also be really clear about what this is? Because what happens is over time, things change. So it's like, okay, yeah, I know that, alcohol I can never touch again, but I can smoke pot every now and then, right? And so that might be a middle circle or whatever. But then if I start finding that when I smoke pot, it makes me want to drink, I'm like, you know what? I'm actually going to move it from the middle circle to the inner circle. This is actually not working for me. So it's a living document and it changes as we change, right? So just the same way that healing isn't linear and healing isn't like a destination at which you arrive. Healing is something that we're participating in like every moment of every day based on how we're treating ourselves, how we're treating others. Having a way to sort of track that, like a document that you can track that, can be really helpful.
Yeah, and it's a living relationship, a
Totally.
relationship with yourself, a relationship with everyone around you, and with us how here in this moment. um, and with these medicines and these, energies, like as you say, I love that you bring up energy in relationship to, and the earth that you brought up, and braiding sweetgrass. I think that's a great resource. We haven't fully talked about that, but maybe we should at this point. What sort of things would you tell someone who is new to, like, let's say they've never had any experience with psychedelics, um, maybe they have been in recovery, and are curious about including that in their path for recovery. What kind of recommendations would you give someone?
So one of my favorite books is called Good Chemistry by Julie Holland. And she talks a lot about that idea of like being in relationship with your own body chemicals. And then she relates it to these, different chemicals that are psychedelics and MDMA and things like that. So I feel like for people that are just curious to get more information, that's a good starting point. Because it really is all about relationship with yourself and learning what that means. Because for some people, psychedelics isn't going to be a good thing, like
And I think that's an important thing to mention. Like,
yeah,
it may not be right for you.
yeah, it's not right for everyone. It's not right for everyone. And
Not right for everyone.
it's not right for everyone. And
Yeah.
Gabor Mate's like Realm of the Hungry Ghost is a really good book about addiction. And his new book, Myth of Normal, is amazing because what he talks about is trauma is not what happens to you, but it's what happens inside you and how that changes everything you're in relationship with. So if you're really going to think about adding an altered state of consciousness into your recovery program, you have to get right in your relationship with yourself and make sure, like what Julio was talking about, when you're sliding into some risky behavior or sliding into addictive behavior, because it's not just the substance. There's so much that creates that addictive energy that we're talking about. And you have to be able to be in relationship with it and dance with it. And so
Yeah, I
those are
actually like think of it in terms of an ecosystem, or
yeah,
I've been calling ecosystem relationship approach,
yeah,
right? Where
For
you're
sure.
part of the ecosystem,
yeah,
people.
yeah,
Totally.
yeah, definitely.
But Julio, what are some things that you might tell someone? And again, it doesn't have to be a physical book or anything like that. But I love that you brought some books for us, Liz, to look at. What are some things you would tell someone?
I think, I guess based on how we work in like the recovery remedy space, like I would share like what's worked for me, because I don't know what's going to work for somebody else. But understanding me, understanding my addiction, like some of the things that I would share, would be to like, I spent 6 years completely abstinent before exploring ayahuasca. And I think those 6 years of complete abstinence were really important for me to get like my bearings straight, and to understand what it's like to spend an entire cycle around the sun or six, without being in an altered state of consciousness. That was actually very helpful for me. The other thing is when starting to participate with, plant medicines, that I'm either, going to a trusted facilitator, um, or that I'm doing it in the context of like some type of psychedelic assisted therapy. Because again, it's like I don't know that I trust myself to do that by myself. Like I don't want Recovery's Remedy to be a place where people who are not ready to be abstinent go and hang out, because that could happen, right? And the thing is like this is something that is a truth that I have to contend with, for myself. But there is this way that like when it's happening during ceremony, or when it's happening during a ketamine assisted therapy session, it's contained there. And so for me, that becomes part of my boundary, that this is when it's okay. But if I'm out at a nightclub and somebody's offering me ketamine, I'm probably going to say no. um and again, those are my boundaries. Like for other people it might be different, but like there is this sense of like, being really clear about the set and setting, being really clear about, the intention, being really clear about, even with the set and setting, like, what's the outcome? Like, is this actually moving you closer to um, what healing looks like for you, or are you chasing healing? Because once you go into that chasing energy, that's very similar to what addiction is, right? And so then for me, when I found myself in that place of chasing, I know I need to do more integration. And so that means I actually have to slow down and like disconnect a little bit from those altered states and from the plants, and connect from just watering my plants, right? And connect with like going to the meetings that work for me. So it's really about like, yes, plant medicines and like these altered states are helpful, but they're not it. It's not the thing. The thing is how I show up moment to moment, day to day. And that's really like sort of the compass.
No, I love that you shared all of that, and even about like the boundary that you set in terms of like I need to do it in this set and setting, and outside of that bounds is not where it's leading towards my health and recovery, right? Or healthy lifestyle. And it made me think of, and you don't feel like you have to comment on this, but Matthew Perry, very much
Oh yeah.
in the news, and how he was very public about his recovery journey and wrote a book about it, and ended up dying as a result of ketamine. Right. And now we can't really speak to the full details of this case, but I think it points to an example of, and it was for home use, right? It wasn't, and doctors were prescribing it, and he was given injections at home, right? Not in the container he had in a sort of more medical setting. And this isn't about giving any judgment to him, and I know he did the best that he could, right, with the resources available. I always see those sort of things as like our community's failure as a society, right, where we weren't able to show up. But someone who's thinking about public cases about that, someone who's not in a recovery, who looks at cases like, well, ketamine must be dangerous, or even if they're in recovery, maybe the 12-step program's right. What would you say to that?
I would say that it is right. And
In that case, maybe in that case it was, right?
no, and I think for some people, and I know these people and I love these people, but they live and die by their 12-step recovery lifestyle. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. There is no judgment against whatever it takes is something that you hear across the board at any place that is working towards addiction recovery. Your path, whatever it takes to keep you healthy, whatever it takes to keep you alive. Part of what we're doing is like, I didn't fit into that. And I also benefited from some of these altered states. Is there risk involved? Absolutely. But I feel like the reward that I've seen versus the risk that I've taken, I've gotten good returns in terms of like the healing that I've been able to accomplish doing that. So I'm willing to engage that. But I know that that can be amplified when I have spaces to process that with other people. Right. So it's that thing of like, I don't know what's going to work for you. I don't know what's going to work for somebody else. All I can do is share what works for me. And I think that's another thing that kind of brings up, in terms of like what feels important to have in recovery spaces or recovery meetings is like that sense of eldership, like that sense of like somebody who has had experiences, some sense of somebody who has screwed it up, some sense of somebody who can talk about those things in a way that other people can hear and be like, oh, okay, like maybe this is something that could be helpful for me. Because that's one of the things that feels a bit edgy about our meeting is that like we welcome anybody and we don't really have a program, right? So if people are really struggling with addiction, um, part of like what we've done is just like have individual conversations with people and be like, hey, I think like abstinence could really be helpful for you. Right? Like that there is this sense of like, get some sense of grounding first so that you know how to live life on life's terms to some extent and stay, you know, uh, functional and have enough well-being before we can come in here and continue to expand. Because the thing about the type of healing that happens with psychedelics can be and often is very destabilizing.
And I think that's really worth pointing out. I don't think it gets enough emphasis. I'll even mention it for people even considering microdosing, right? Like if you're already in a destabilized state, you I personally would not recommend someone introducing something else that will continue to destabilize you. You should be coming from a grounded state. But that makes it kind of complex with addiction, right? If people are in a destabilized state and they see like, well, what if this could help me get to that stabilized state? That sort of breakthrough sort of experience, right? I know that's been coming up for people, but maybe we should shift to talk about, you know, what has been your experience? I love the edginess, but also the heart of your guys' work and relationship. What has been your experience? How long have you been doing this at and in your particular organization or community, I should say? And what have you seen in terms of results in relationship?
Yeah, I can jump in. So, we started this, was it July of 23? July of 2023 in Portland. We started a monthly meeting at the Rhizome. That's an educational community here for people that are interested in learning about psychedelics. And then Portland Psychedelic Society asked us to also do a group with them. So we have two groups a month. One's at the Rhizome on the first Tuesday, and the other one is on the third Friday in Tabor Space. So they're both in person. And we're also starting an online group since Julio's moved across the country. So we have three groups now. And it's been really beautiful, especially watching the group change. Sometimes we're talking about our addictive behavior, or sometimes we're talking about our family and why it's making us want to use, or making us feel crazy, or, and sometimes we're talking about politics and how that is really causing a lot of hopelessness and despair. And what's the point of working so hard in recovery when there's all this hopelessness and despair? And so it gives us a place to come together, and when I think about Matthew Perry, and I think about the fact that it wasn't the ketamine that killed him, right? He was by himself in a hot tub. Like, there were so many layers of what got him to that place. And it just breaks my heart to think that there are still addicts out there who are really longing for their connection, right? In a lot of ways, people are needing more relationship with each other. And that's the remedy, right? Is just getting people to have each other, to call each other, to be like, hey, I'm in a ton of pain right now and I want to get in my hot tub and do some ketamine. Like, is it possible to have, the kind of relationships in your life that you can call and get that same need met? And that's what we're hoping to create, is that kind of community where we're meeting that need. If when you're needing people, you can call and you can contact that group that you're in without shame. And to be like, hey, I'm going to
Without
do this.
shame, without
Yeah.
shame, and I think that's saying something, like the fact that there is so much judgment, right? There's already a lot of pain that brings one into relationship with addiction, with that energy, that experience for healing, right? For transformation. And then to be in that experience of knowing you need to work on it, and then to experience more judgment and more shame, right when you need that compassion the most. And then you add in something like psychedelics and like, oh, okay, you must still be, because there's a lot of taboo around psychedelics. So it's like, okay, it's like, look, this is what's working for me. It may not work for you, and it makes me want to say, just generally, the recommendation for compassion, connection, listening, being a space, and still having healthy boundaries if you can't be that for that person, but someone else, or connect them. So as we start to kind of wrap up, and I know Julio, you may want to chime in on that last question as well. Uh, what what sort of messages of hope could you give people who are in recovery right now, in the community environment that we find ourselves? Like, if we can start bridging that, like, okay, lack of judgment,
We want to make you more, help enable you, empower you, as it were, to be more shame-free, right? In this moment, right now, what can we provide them?
Yeah, I think part of the, like a lot of psychedelic society, um, one of their taglines is find the others. And I think even within this like sub community of these two communities that we're talking about, the others are out there. Like when we started offering this meeting and people would come, they're like, I've been waiting for something like this to open up. Like there's people that like are in the same place that Liz and I were in, where it's just like, this is like this part of me that I don't get to take anywhere. And part of like what happens is like we get compartmentalized. Where it's like I take my recovery here and I do my psychedelic work here, but like there isn't a place where like I can just be my full self. And I don't know. I wish nothing on anybody other than to have the experience of having their full self be welcome anywhere. Um, and I think that's part of like the invitation and like the offering. It's like let's do this together. And that, it's possible, that the others are out there, that it's just, a little bit of searching there. I mean, there's psychedelics in recovery. We're not the only ones that are doing this, right? So it's like the more the merrier. Hopefully everybody finds the flavor that really works for them. And also to like inspire people that like if everything that's out there doesn't work for you, start your own. People will find you and you will find others, like there's a ton of people out there.
Yes, there are others out there. You're not
Yeah.
alone. You're not
Right.
alone. You're not alone. You're not alone. You're not alone. It feels alone, but you're not alone. You're not alone. You're not alone. What about you, Liz? Some final thoughts.
Yeah, my favorite TED Talk is by Johann Hari because he says, the opposite of addiction isn't abstinence, it's connection. And yeah, how do we get more in connection with each other? How do we get more, like Julio was saying, find your tribe, find your people. And if it's not there, then create it and they'll find you. And that's just what we're needing now more than ever.
That's beautiful. I think that's a beautiful note to end on. And I'm grateful to be connected to each of you. I'm very grateful, very blessed to be able to have this connection and relationship and to
Likewise.
help reach out in connection to others, for them to know about your work and your community and you as individuals. So thank you for connecting with me today.
Yeah, thank you for
Thank
letting
you
us
for
be
having
here.
us.
And
Yeah.
thank you for creating this for our community. It's really important and
Oh.
you're very important. So thank you for this offering.
Thank you. Thank you for that gift. Yeah, thank you. I have to say that this episode means a lot to me. I mean, all the episodes mean a lot to me, but as I get more comfortable with sharing some of my own personal stories in relationship to these subjects, I'll at least admit to you, my audience, that this is not a casual topic for any of us. And you can tell from the stories shared by Julio and Elizabeth that it definitely is personal for them, that psychedelics have been a key part of their recovery. It's not for everyone. And to be open to healing and seeing what is supportive for you and coming into alignment with that for you is really essential. I have had friends who have worked through the recovery, and others who currently are struggling with their recovery, and it's not easy for anyone involved, whether you're someone who identifies as a family member, a friend, with someone who is struggling with substance dependency, or whether you yourself are struggling with the dependency. This is a community issue. It's not an issue just for one person. Uh, it is not, for me, at least in my perspective and in my experience, having experienced time and time again, and having lost, close friends and family around this, that it's really essential that we understand that we need to have a compassionate, heart-centered approach to these questions. And as we face the challenges around the opioid quote unquote crisis, as we recover from the quote unquote war on drugs, we take an honest look at ourselves and our communities and how we can create more supportive environments to source each other through all of the journeys that we experience, whether it has to do with substance abuse, dependency, and whether it's healing through a transformative experience in our lives. That's very human. So sending you all love, and I hope you found this episode supportive on your journey.
Thank you for joining me on Psychedelic Source. If you found value in today's episode, please subscribe wherever you get your podcast and share with others in our community. And if you're a psychedelic practitioner, therapist, or coach looking to identify blind spots in your practice or determine next steps for moving it forward, take the first step by visiting psychedelicsourcepodcast.com. Until next time, remember, start low, go slow, and stay connected to your source.